Hello, we are about to start item 3 on this videotape. These comments were made in December 1986. Fort Yukon is near the confluence of the Porcupine and the Yukon rivers. Bank of the lower Porcupine River being undercut by the high stage of water. I'm aboard the Moose, which is pushing a barge load of supplies to Old Crow, some 300 miles upstream. Approaching the ramparts, a 100-mile section of the river where its banks are canyon-like. At the entrance to the ramparts, we pass this formation known as the Howling Dog. Scene taken at midnight in the ramparts on June 21, 1945. The riffle, or shallow swift water, at New Rampart House near the international boundary between Alaska and the Yukon. New Rampart House, a former Hudson's Bay post, was abandoned at the time I was there. Unloading the barge at our destination, Old Crow. The Moose struck a rock in midstream on its next trip and was lost. The Northern Commercial Company trading post at Old Crow, formerly known as Jackson Brothers, it had been operated by the surviving brother, Jim Jackson, until he sold out to the company. The supplies consisted of a great variety of clothing, canned and dried foods, trapping and fishing equipment, and supplies, as well as kerosene and gasoline, which came in wooden boxes, 2 5-gallon cans to a box. A wheeled aircraft brought in a load of fresh goods for trader Harry Healy. The aircraft landed on a river bar, which had been leveled with shovels by the RCMP and marked with white cloth for flags. View of Old Crow Village from the river, with the Old Crow Mountains in the background. The dwellings were mostly of log construction with sod roofs. The red-roofed RCMP detachment buildings. The arrival of RCMP inspecting officers, Superintendent D.J. Martin, then OCG Division, and Inspector H.H. Cronkite, then OC Yukon Subdivision. Myself and Jack Frost, a former member of the RCMP, bringing up their effects. A view of the new greenhouse, the dog yard, the cabin I lived in, a small building I spent a lot of time in, the food cache, and the dog food cache. And finally, the ice house. Here are Corporal E.A. George Kirk and Mrs. Kirk opening up the greenhouse. They are about to harvest the first tomatoes to grow and ripen at Old Crow, which is some 75 miles or so inside the Arctic Circle. They were able to grow enough of these tomatoes and a few other vegetables, for example carrots and peas, to last sparingly for a few weeks. These were a delightful treat when most of our food was either dried or came in tin cans. Here I am in a cranky old canoe visiting a fish net we had set where the Indians usually put their nets. They were away on the annual muskrat hunt at this particular time. There was a good catch that day. Here it is, quite a variety. Some of the fish would be fed green to the dogs. The choicest and excess fish would be preserved by being put in the deep freeze, a pit dug into the permafrost. This is Boise, one of the corporal's dogs. The RCMP dogs in their summer location along the riverfront, the dog yard being a quagmire in summer due to the melting permafrost. Here I'm changing the water. The water was usually changed several times a day, and as you see, the buckets were mounted on posts to help keep the water clean. You see Prince, my wheel dog, jumping up, and Towser closest to the camera. There was lots of running water. Just had to go and fetch it. I'm using cans made from 5-gallon gasoline cans. The dogs ate snow in the wintertime. Cooking dog food in the morning. This was mainly a cereal mash with some tallow. We often added table scraps, caribou bones, fish, cod liver oil, or perhaps a rabbit or two. We fed the dogs once a day. Around supper time, the food buckets, like the water buckets, were made from gasoline cans. We had to remove the food buckets as soon as the dogs had finished. Otherwise, they would have ripped the buckets apart with their teeth in order to get at the morsels in the corners. RCMP Commissioner S.T. Wood arrived for an inspection by RCMP aircraft CFMPG, a Grumman Goose. There is the Commissioner with his back to the camera on the right. From Old Crow, Commissioner and party headed for a rendezvous with the RCMP schooner St. Rock, which was in the Arctic at that time. Our wind charger tower here is an easterly view from the tower. The corrugated buildings you see belong to two of the three local traders. Joe Nitro's on the right foreground, the NC companies in the distance. The Old Crow trading post operated by Harry Healy. An old-timer of that country. Observe the roof made from gasoline cans. The Northern Commercial Company trading post. It also had a gas can roof. Former owner of the post, Jim Jackson, is in the center. Claude Tidd, first manager for the company, on the right. Mr. Steele, successor to Mr. Tidd, on the left. Mr. Tidd's wife had become ill, otherwise his stay would not have been so brief. The boat that eventually replaced the Moose, this boat was so powerful it cut the time from Fort Yukon in half, but it couldn't carry enough fuel on board for the trip, hence valuable space on the barge had to be used. This new boat was lost in the fall of 1947 when it caught fire a short distance from Old Crow and had to be cut adrift from the barge. This is Sam Olson, a trapper, prospector, and sheet metal worker. Albert Schaefer, a trapper. Frank Foster, a nearly blind, well-educated man who spent much of his life in the North as a trader. David Lord, a trapper. Note the lobstick or tree with limbs cut off in a certain way. Such lobsticks were used in the early days as landmarks.